one of your interests is interdisciplinary study of literature and comparisons between literature of the East and the West. Tell us about the East and the West, literature of the East and the West.
The literature of the West, of course, it's heavily influenced by colonialist ideas, Eurocentric ideas, while with the East you'll find that it celebrates their religions, their cultures, and the way they view the world, and their gods. When I was at University of Ghana, I did a paper where I compared one of Mark McWatt's stories, the Gothic elements in his stories, to the tenets of Japanese Gothic literature, showing how they were very similar, but also very different. And that is what showed me. That was the paper that opened my eyes to just how radically different the literature of the East and the literature of the West is, not only in terms of the culture it examines, but also in terms of how the stories are told and from what perspective they're told from. For example, in the Western Gothic tradition, if a character is feeling depressed and wants to commit suicide, it's perceived as something bad, because from a Christian perspective that's bad. But with the Japanese Gothic tradition, especially with certain samurais, those feelings of depression are actually seen as something good, and it's also seen as the person entering a new stage of enlightenment. So them committing suicide would be something actually perceived to be positive rather than negative, which is something I found very shocking when I did the research. And then that kind of led me, because then I realized I know a lot about Greek and Roman mythology, but not a lot about the myths of the East. China and Japan and Korea. So it propelled me to start doing the research, and I just got more and more interested into it.
Nice. You talk about differences. What about similarities between the East and the West in literature?
One similarity you would find is that in both, binary opposites are key. We must have this whole idea of good versus evil and right and wrong.
Yang and yin.
Yes, yang and yin. But in the Eastern literature, it is more common to find a ambiguous or vague ending whereby good doesn't win, nor does evil, but there's some sort of compromise where they coexist
between and betwixt.
Right. But you see, with the Western now, it's black or white for the most part.
Kind of finite. Yeah.
But what I find is that post-colonial writers, Caribbean writers, now, the modernists, the visionaries like Wilson Harris, who actually grew in the traditions of Wilson Harris, they would explore the in-between space more now. But that exploration of the in-between space is something that Japanese and Chinese
have explored
for centuries.
Wow. Scott, Red Hibiscus, your first book, a novel. A novel with a twist, a novel with a difference. How would you like for us to view this book? Through the eyes, the Western eyes or the Eastern eyes?
My book, I would like to think that I wrote it with sufficient ambiguity at certain points so that the reader can basically take it whichever way they go. Pauline Melville, when she visited University of Ghana, I think in 2011, she said, or no, 2013 rather, she mentioned that when it comes to books, the writer does 50% of the work, but it doesn't really become a book. Unless the readers, they do the other 50% of the work,
Yes.
because they see the value in it.
Yeah.
I agree with that 110%. So I will not limit the readers if I want them to look at it through Western or Eastern. I let them shock me. Read it, see what they can see, and show me things that I didn't even know I put in there. I wrote it, it is meant to, I intended for it to be seen as a post-colonial work, even though it's set in ancient China.
Yeah.
At its very core, underneath it all, it does go back to the Caribbean and the Caribbean experience. And in my attempt to celebrate, explore, and reconnect with Chinese heritage and Chinese tradition, it also points out, on the other hand, what the Chinese descendants in the Caribbean might have lost through colonialism.
In a strange land
Mm-hmm.
with strange weapons. Are we destined to be slaves? That's the connection, East and the West.
Right.
All right. The author's note: Red Hibiscus is a literary experimentation with myth, creation, and flash forward. Talk to us about Red Hibiscus.
Red Hibiscus, it's heavily steeped in history and mythology. So I lot the major gods, the popular ones, like Chang'e, the moon goddess, Ho Yi, her husband, the great archer, Zhongru, Gong Gong, the water god, they're all in there. But in retelling their stories from my perspective, and the thing is that my perspective of these gods is actually influenced by a book I read over and over as a child. It's called Old Tales Retold by Lu Xun. And in that book, he took 10 of the most popular Chinese myths and folklore and wrote them as short stories. So my conceptions of how these gods acted and behaved is heavily influenced by his recreation of them, rather than the established myths that you would find. So it's only now I'm actually learning about the actual established myths, but I still went with what has grown with me as a child from Lu Xun. And with the myth creation, so Chu Hua, Zhao Hui, and Murasaki Ren, the three clairvoyants who are the protagonists of this tale, they of themselves become mythical characters. They become potentially legends and legendary heroes or villains, depending how you want to look at it. And
Yes.
in addition to that, Lady Shaoli, the flower goddess, she does not exist in actual myths. I created her. So
Wow.
that's so Chu Hua, Zhao Hui, Murasaki Ren, they're all part of myth creation, and Lady Shaoli, this very powerful goddess featured in this novel, is also one that I just created on my own.
Scott, some of the names you pronounce sound like Japanese and Chinese.
Yes, so the three clairvoyants, two of them are Chinese. The two girls are Chinese, that'd be Chu Hua and Zhao Hui. But the male clairvoyant, Murasaki Ren, he is actually Japanese. So actually, with the way how the story goes in this book, the two of them have to work together. Even though at that time, and even up to now, they're frictions between the two countries.
Tell us the tale, and then perhaps we delve deeper into the book. Tell us the story of Red Hibiscus. It's a pretty tale. It's a colorful tale.
It is.
Right.
It starts off with a old woman that who gets a sudden vision of how to do cracking of bones. Cracking of bones is seen as the beginning of Chinese literature because it's the earliest known artifact that actually has writing in Chinese history. Now with the cracking of bones, what would happen, you know, you'd put the bones, expose them to a heat source, and they would get heat cracks as a result. Now, usually the king, who's believed to be endowed with the abilities to divine, would read the bones and the messages of the king would be recorded and scrolled. So she gets a vision as to how to do this, and she does it. And she's able to see in the future that there will be three. So this is a seer who is able to foresee the birth of three powerful seers who will be able to see further in history than anyone ever could.
Wow.
And than any diviner would ever be able to. And that would be Chu Hua, Zhao Hui, and Murasaki Ren. So what happens, you are introduced to the three of them, but the book is fragmented, if I was to put it that way, because you start off by being introduced to Chu Hua, and then we fast forward a bit,
then there's
you meet
right,
Zhao Hui.
I noticed that.
Then you go to Ren, so that way, because their destinies are intertwined into one, so it only makes sense that when you write it, you show that intertwining of their destinies together. And so they get these visions, and they see the same thing.
The same, right? That's it.
So it's shared visions. That's the whole thing of them being one. So it's a bit of, it has a Horatian twist to it. Then you are separate, but you're a single spiritual entity. Yes, let's go past the peacock like that. Yes, Wilson Harris played a big role.
You're talking about Wilson, yeah, you're talking about Wilson and the cracking bones, and I'm thinking about the bone flute in Wilson Harris. So like bones playing a lot of things.
Right.
Even this young lady, Mahai Das, in her book Bones, book of poems, Bones. But go on with your tale.
They eventually meet together, and when they meet, they decide that they need to record these visions that they're seeing in order to preserve it for posterity, because they don't know how far in the future they're actually seeing, but they know it's very far away, and they won't be able to live to see these things that they're seeing. So they record it.
How they recorded it?
They record it in the form of link verse poetry.
Wow.
Why poetry? Because ancient cultures, poetry and prophecy would be strongly interlinked. In ancient Greece, the Oracle of Delphi would give prophecies in the form of riddles or poems, because Apollo was the god of prophecy and also the god of poetry. In other ancient cultures, Middle Eastern cultures and East Asian cultures, you would find a similar combination of poetry and prophecy.
Wow. Right. And then there's something else to poetry. Because of the rhyme and the rhythm, you can retain it as having it being written.
Right.
So it can be passed on and on and on and on. So the book is an experimentation. There's prose and there is poetry.